The play is set in Yebi, a village on the Ghanaian coast, in the 19th century. At the center of the story is Anowa, the daughter of Badua and Osam, who is known for her strong will and independent spirit. The opening of the play reveals a conflict between Anowa and her mother, Badua, who is frustrated with her daughter's refusal to conform to societal expectations, particularly in the matter of marriage. While other girls of her age have married well and brought pride to their families, Anowa has rejected several suitors, insisting on choosing a husband on her own terms. Anowa's rejection of traditional marriage customs culminates in her decision to marry Kofi Ako, a man who is seen as lazy and unambitious by the villagers. Anowa's mother, Badua, disapproves of the match, believing that Kofi is not worthy of her daughter, while her father, Osam, takes a more passive stance, allowing Anowa to make her own choices. Despite her family's objections, Anowa follows her heart and marries Kofi, determined to live a life of freedom and independence. This decision reflects Anowa's deep desire to break away from the limitations imposed on women by society, but it also sets her on a path of isolation from her community and family. After their marriage, Anowa and Kofi move away from Yebi to make a life for themselves. Initially, their relationship is marked by mutual respect and equality. They work together to establish a business in trading, starting with selling skins and gradually becoming more successful. Anowa, who is hardworking and determined, plays an active role in their success, refusing to be a passive wife. She takes pride in their partnership, believing that they are building a life based on mutual effort. As Kofi Ako's business grows, he begins to embrace the use of slave labor to expand their wealth. This is a pivotal moment in the play, as it marks the beginning of the moral and philosophical rift between Anowa and Kofi. Anowa is strongly opposed to slavery, believing it to be unethical and contrary to her values of freedom and self-determination. She views the use of slaves as a betrayal of the principles on which they built their lives. Kofi, on the other hand, sees slavery as a practical means to achieve greater prosperity and status. The tension between the couple intensifies as Kofi's desire for wealth pushes him further into the world of exploitation, while Anowa grows increasingly alienated from him. As Kofi becomes more engrossed in his business and the pursuit of wealth, Anowa finds herself increasingly isolated. She feels disconnected not only from her husband but also from the society around her, which values wealth and status over moral integrity. Anowa's refusal to accept slavery as part of their success puts her at odds with both Kofi and the larger community. She begins to feel trapped in a life that she no longer recognizes, as the ideals of freedom and equality that once defined her marriage have been eroded by greed and exploitation. This isolation contributes to Anowa's growing sense of despair and disillusionment. Another source of tension between Anowa and Kofi is their inability to have children. In their society, a woman's worth is often tied to her ability to bear children, and Anowa's childlessness becomes a point of shame and frustration, particularly for Kofi. While Anowa is not consumed by the desire for children, Kofi begins to see their lack of offspring as a personal failure, and his resentment towards Anowa grows. The societal pressure to produce heirs weighs heavily on their marriage, further widening the emotional gap between them. Anowa's childlessness also symbolizes her broader struggle against the traditional roles assigned to women in her society. The accumulation of these tensions, Anowa's opposition to slavery, her growing isolation, and the strain of childlessness, leads to the eventual breakdown of her marriage with Kofi. Kofi, who once respected Anowa's independence, now views her as a burden. He becomes increasingly indifferent to her feelings and focuses solely on his business and wealth. Anowa, in turn, feels betrayed by the man she once loved, as he has abandoned the values they once shared. Their relationship deteriorates into bitter arguments and resentment, with Kofi blaming Anowa for their problems, while Anowa becomes more vocal in her discontent with his moral compromises. The climax of the play occurs when Kofi and Anowa have a final, explosive confrontation about the state of their lives. Kofi accuses Anowa of being the cause of their troubles, particularly their childlessness, and suggests that she is cursed. Anowa, in a moment of profound clarity and despair, realizes that she has lost everything: her independence, her moral integrity, and her connection to her husband. She confronts Kofi about his greed and the corruption of their once idealistic partnership. This confrontation is both a personal and philosophical reckoning, as Anowa grapples with the realization that her desire for freedom has led her to a place of profound loneliness and disillusionment. In a devastating conclusion, both Anowa and Kofi meet tragic ends. Kofi, unable to bear the weight of his guilt and failures, takes his own life. Anowa, overwhelmed by grief and isolation, also dies by suicide. Their deaths represent the ultimate failure of their relationship and the collapse of the ideals they once held. Anowa's tragic end is symbolic of the consequences of rejecting societal norms while also being unable to find a new path that leads to fulfillment. In the aftermath of Anowa's death, the play leaves the audience to reflect on the broader themes of tradition, gender roles, and personal freedom. Anowa's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of rejecting societal norms without finding a sustainable alternative. Her struggle for independence is admirable, but it also reveals the deep conflicts between personal freedom and societal expectations. Aidoo's play critiques both the limitations imposed on women in traditional societies and the cost of defying those limitations without a clear path forward.